Welcome to Blaze News, The Mandate, Day 12. I'm Jill Savage. Tonight on the agenda, as the USAID scandal unravels, we continue to discover more and more parties that had a financial relationship with the government agency. One of the latest is the World Economic Forum, which received over $68 million in the past decade. And you know the Clintons had to be a part of it. Chelsea Clinton reportedly got $84 million from USAID. But the Trump administration is trying to make amends for the waste of taxpayer dollars, as White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt laid out Trump's proposed tax cuts earlier today.
My receipts. I like to bring your receipts. So these are the tax priorities of the Trump administration that the president has laid out for members in that meeting today. No tax on tips, which is obviously a very public campaign promise the president made. No tax on seniors' Social Security. No tax on overtime pay. Renewing President Trump's 2017 middle-class tax cuts. Again, these are the president's priorities. Adjusting the SALT cap, eliminate all the special tax breaks for billionaire sports team owners, close the carried interest tax deduction loophole, tax cuts for Made in America products. This will be the largest tax cut in history for middle-class working Americans. The president is committed to working with Congress to get this done.
Over in the Senate, the Judiciary Committee delayed Kash Patel's confirmation vote by 1 week.
The minority, as well as myself, have exercised their right and my right under the committee rules to hold over the nomination of Kash Patel to be director of the FBI.
Democratic Senator Dick Durbin said the longer time is meant to take politics out of the equation. This morning, President Trump spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast and promised to reinvigorate religion in America by saying, let's bring God back into our lives. Trump also announced that he's signing an executive order to make Attorney General Pam Bondi the head of a task force to combat anti-Christian bias. Watch.
To confront such weaponization and religious persecution, today I'm signing an executive order to make our Attorney General, who's a great person, she's going to be a great Attorney General, Pam Bondi, the head of a task force, brand new, to eradicate anti-Christian bias. About time, right?
And of course, he had some words for Politico about the USAID funds. Take a look.
Did you see what happened yesterday where they found hundreds of millions of dollars of money was fraudulently given to newspapers and I guess Politico? I don't know. They're here. Good. I hope you're enjoying your breakfast.
That's got to be my favorite soundbite of the entire week. Well, I hope you're enjoying your breakfast. Now let's bring in Blaze News Editor-in-Chief Matthew Peterson. I mean, we look at USAID and we now get to add on the World Economic Forum and Chelsea Clinton to the mix.
Well, it wouldn't be surprising if the Clinton Foundation received money here. They've received money from everyone else over the years, and it was fine. So, including Russians, the worst thing, right? Russian collusion and the Clinton Foundation go way back to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. So, what everyone is seeing is a great unveiling of how the system works. And it's complicated, right? I mean, the Politico, it was subscriptions and, there's many different organizations involved, and a lot of the organizations then disperse that money to other organizations. But the truth of the matter is the way that this system works is now seen by millions of Americans, and that's a game changer. It's shuffling money off to your allies.
I think that along with everything else has left so many of the leftists unhinged this week in particular, because there was one that I saw on X this morning that was like, Donald Trump, he's at a prayer breakfast. Look at this MAGA right. Look at what they're doing right now. And they're like, by the way, Obama spoke at these, Biden spoke at these. They happen every year. Yeah. But because it's just one more thing, they're all up in arms.
Well, because he's different. Unlike all other politicians, he's truly evil, right? I mean, give me a break. He was at the prayer breakfast. It was amazing to me at the very end. It's almost like he was leading up to it. I was thinking, like, not just religion. Religion is good, but you're going to say more than that. And then right at the very end, he sort of like put in there, because he wanted to, right? But it was very fast at the end. We have to bring God back. Thank you very much. And that's a it's a turning point for Trump. It's very interesting.
The one minor win I think that the leftists get today is Kash Patel. His vote is going to be pushed back for a week. It's now going to be February 13th.
Yeah, look, I mean, I had to just say the quiet part out loud here. I mean, the goal, I assume, is to dig up as much dirt as they can and lob, enough feces, at him, basically. And that's what they are. They're like animals. And the animals are going to throw as much dirt and refuse as they can on his name between now and then, and that's no doubt the goal. But on the other hand, Kash Patel is well loved, he's well liked, and he's got a lot of momentum.
And he's been one that went out there and just absolutely crushed his hearing, so that it's not like they have enough stuff that they can go through and figure out, let's hit him on this answer that he gave here or there. And that's why they just need to delay and figure out anything that they can in a 1 week time frame. The clock is ticking.
Yeah, you can't really. He has enough, credibility in terms of a resume. His hearings went well. This is about finding dirt and playing the usual game. I mean, so that's all it's about. This is not about the truth. This is not about, using your tax dollars to find the right person. This is just going to be, I imagine at least 2 or 3 salvos of garbage thrown at him during this time. But, the funny thing is that a lot of people don't give a damn anymore. I don't care, Margaret, right? I mean, that's what's going on now.
The deep state is going to try their best, but you know what? It's not going to work this time. And when we come back, we're going to look at how deep the rabbit hole goes for USAID. Chris Bedford will help us unpack the numbers next. Well, did you know that 85% of all the grass-fed beef in the stores is actually imported? That's thanks to a 2015 law change. Foreign meat can now be labeled product of the United States just because it's packaged here. That means that grocery store meat is often full of antibiotics, hormones, and even seed oils. But Good Ranchers is different. They're 100% American meat. They have no hidden additives, no seed oils. They're just clean, high-quality protein. Their beef, chicken, and seafood are all born, raised, and harvested here in the United States, so you know exactly where your food comes from. And their seed oil-free chicken nuggets are officially back. They're made with whole cuts of chicken. They're gluten-free, allergy-safe, and packed with clean, delicious flavor that you can feel good about serving. And you can subscribe to a full box of nuggets or get them as an add-on to any order. And the best part, Good Ranchers delivers straight to your door, so you can skip all the grocery store lines and get farm-to-table quality while supporting American ranchers. Right now, with their New Year, New Meat promo, you can get free ground beef, chicken breast, or wild-caught salmon in every order for a year, plus $25 off with code Jill at checkout. Don't wait, order now. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. This week, the American people have been able to see firsthand the waste and fraud that our taxpayer dollars have been used for. So what was the $68 million from USAID going to the World Economic Forum for? Well, here to unpack all of this is Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford. So, Bedford, tell us, what are we wasting our money on this time today, right? There's a new story every day now. Tell us what's the latest.
That's the thing, though. Waste, fraud, and abuse is so Tea Party 2000s. This isn't waste, fraud, and abuse. This is a machine that they've built. The shining city on the hill is actually a well-oiled machine in the swamp. And this is the entire left-wing edifice that they've built. And by the way, USAID is just a beginning. It is just one of many tumors on the system, but it is one that's in the glands. It's one that's spreading cancer through the bloodstream. It is funding left-wing organizations to millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, not just in the United States, but absolutely globally, in Ireland and Switzerland and France and Africa and Asia and South America, and of course, right here in Washington, D.C. They have built, it's an ecosystem that we've discussed here before that is paid for by the federal government. It's paid for through lawsuits the feds actually get from different companies. It's also paid for with corporate donations, although those have finally begun to dry up in the last 6 months or so. And it creates this kind of feeling that, like you see in the World Economic Forum, like you see at Davos, this feeling that there is this massive and incredibly powerful edifice. And honestly, I knew that the money was always there. I always would giggle to myself when you'd hear that big moneyed interests are fighting against global warming science. Like, that's not true. There's trillions of dollars in global science, global warming hysteria, and thousands to hundreds of thousands and actually pushing back against it. What I didn't realize, and what is kind of being laid bare here, is that this Goliath is actually not as powerful and unbeatable as it at first seemed. You just have to cut off the money. And since so much of it is not actually funded by grassroots activism and people just sending in their $20 bills and $100 bills or donating or tithing, it's funded by the government. Well, it turns out you can just turn off the spigot and the whole thing dries up.
So well said. It's so true that what's being exposed now is not just waste. I love how you said that. It really is the structure of the system. It's unveiling this is how this machine works. That's so true. And I think that's why it puts this over the top. It's not even about waste. So when it comes to cutting the spigot off, obviously the first thing is, we just turn that dial. Elon presses delete or has one of his Zen boys do the same. That's great. We turn it off. What else do you think we should see in terms of investigations and accountability? Because I can't help but thinking, as our fellow host Steve Deace said, there's a lot of potential legal action here that could result when you start diving into this sea of madness.
Yeah, I think the legal action is one aspect, going after players who've committed fraud, which of course is dangerous. I mean, USAID is an arm of the CIA. It's just, you think of the CIA as this kind of covert, early Cold War organization, but a lot of what they're funding is just global liberalism. It's kind of weird and a real black pill for where our intelligence apparatus has gone. Unfortunately for the Trump administration, a lot of this is also going to need to be followed up legislatively. I mean, the left has been slow to respond. They have been scattered, they have been defunded, they have been demoralized. But they've been placing judges all for decades and decades and decades in Massachusetts, in Washington, D.C., California, and they're going to go to these federal judges and going to ask for these things to be stopped. I actually think, and I've got a piece coming out tomorrow on Beltway Brief about this, that they are shaking up the system enough to actually literally impact the real estate market here, to really impact the culture here, to actually change the trajectories of a whole lot of careers and kind of end this pat in the back system. But you need to keep that up for years in order to actually fix anything. And it honestly needs to be backed by legislative action. And Congress right now, with a very, very thin majority in the House of Representatives, and even actually a little bigger in the Senate, they can't even agree on tax cuts. They can't agree on funding the immigration agenda. They're a disaster. I mean, just today, talking to senior Capitol Hill staffers in the Senate and House, saying, what is this, 1 bill, 2 bill, 3 bills? They shrug, laugh, and say, well, what have you heard? It's because no one even knows who's actually in charge of the few things that are already on their plate. Forget about actually backing this up. I've got an interview with Hillsdale professor David Azerrad that I filmed this afternoon in front of yours, Matt, for this show tomorrow, that he kind of lays out the dangers of live by the pen, die by the pen. I still think that this move fast and break things is actually exposing a huge amount, and this won't simply be undone like a couple of executive orders within the federal government. It'll be too hard. The damage will be too great. But you do need something to back it up with a combination of lawsuits and legislative action.
Sounds like a Dr. Seuss rhyme out there. 1 bill, 2 bill, 3 bills, 4, right? What are we going to do out there on Capitol Hill? You need to get them together. But Brandon Gill is a friend of the show. He's a Texas representative. I loved it because he had some thoughts on why Democrats aren't upset over the taxpayer dollars being used by USAID. Watch this.
It seems to me that leftists are apoplectic not because our tax dollars are being wasted on idiotic things, but because all of it is being exposed all of the sudden, which I think is certainly a beautiful thing. So much of this government waste has been operating in the shadows where the American people don't know about it and has been largely unaccounted for. And so many of these programs wouldn't exist and will not exist now that they're being exposed.
And one of our friends from North Carolina, Matt Van Swoll, took to X this morning and he was saying, I was a Democrat, but now that I see that the Democrats weren't outraged over what was happening in North Carolina. They weren't outraged by the wildfires in Los Angeles. They weren't holding press conferences every day saying, oh my gosh, you better go stop these crazy people that are doing these insane things. No, but now, Chris, now we're seeing press conferences all the time.
Absolutely. That's what they do. Just like you didn't see AOC crying down on the border during Joe Biden's administration, despite the border crisis being so much worse. Yeah, I'll be meeting with the congressman tomorrow morning to talk about the left-wing funding of media, and absolutely look forward to it because, he hit it right there. The problem that they're not concerned with the American citizen. They've made that extremely clear. They're concerned with foreign citizens. They're concerned with moneyed interests. They're concerned with accumulating power. They're concerned with NGOs. They're not concerned with the poor people down in North Carolina who had their lives ruined. They're barely even concerned with the people in the Palisades who had their lives destroyed. They're concerned with maintaining this machine, this apparatus, this control. That is why they're holding the press conferences. I mean, I'm just looking at this tweet right now from Eric Weinstein, the guy who was famous from The Big Short, talking about how this has finally exposed the managed reality that we've been living in, the scratch your back system that exists here, the $35 million over 5 years going to political pro to right to the government about what the government's doing for the government, paid for by the government, and on the side breaking scoops, which are complete lies that are then repeated by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and USA Today. This is the managed reality we live in, the system that's been used of NGOs and nonprofits to also suppress people who are dissidents. This is a whole machine that's been uncovered. You've essentially pulled back the curtain, and you've seen the wizard, and he's right there, and he doesn't like that one bit.
Well, if you want your blood to boil for about 60 seconds, let's listen to Senator Eric Schmidt, because he went on a rant exposing some of the government waste, and it is a doozy.
Because you can't really defend this kind of stuff. $45 million for diversity and inclusion scholarships in Burma. $3 million for girl-centered climate action in Brazil. $125 million to racialize public health. $288,000 for diverse birdwatcher groups. USAID, which is in the center of the storm right now, and rightfully so, spent $1.5 billion to, quote, advance diversity, equity, inclusion in Serbia's workplaces and business communities. $70,000 for the production of a DEI musical in Ireland. $2.5 billion for electric vehicles for Vietnam. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Columbia. Not Columbia, Missouri, or Columbia, South Carolina, the country of Columbia. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt. This is what they're mad about.
Listen, I know that when we have $36 trillion in our national debt, the millions aren't going to be the thing that really kill us. But, I mean, do we not even get a tape? Do we not even get the video posted on YouTube of the trans plays that are down there in Colombia? Like, we can't even see this with our own taxpayer-funded dollars, Chris?
I mean, it's important. It's even more important than the money spent because it makes you realize that the American empire's major export for the last 20 plus years has been decline. It has been questioning your own values, questioning your religion, undermining the Christian faith, undermining marriage between men and women, undermining the sanctity of life, undermining sovereignty, undermining economies, undermining national determination. These are the things that the United States government has been exporting. It is a global revolution on the level of the KGB, but instead of actually having some kind of system that they want to create, they just have a system that they want to destroy. All of those things, they're not just stupid programs. They're all tied together, and they're all meant to make you lose faith in Ireland, lose faith in Serbia, lose faith in Burma, whatever city and whatever system, whatever family you come from. These systems are united in attacking and undermining those.
Yeah, Chris, as we've discussed before on the show and off, I mean, this really reveals the religious nature of this thing, right? Because, as you said, all these things are united. How are they united? Well, they represent a certain set of, values and a value system that is, in fact, what we've been exporting. And I think that, again, goes to the anger right now because it's so obvious that it is a system. When we were growing up, there would always be these moments where Republicans would get up in arms, and you remember, I mean, it was like clockwork. How much we're paying? NASA's paying however much, thousands of dollars for toilet seats and that sort of thing. But that's not what this is. So don't you think this is also a moment in which it exposes the substantial nature of the corruption, what it's actually about to the American people? And it appears so far like it's not just, I hope I'm not in a bubble, but I'm looking around all the media. It looks like a resounding, no, we don't want this anymore.
Yeah, I think that not only you can tell that people don't actually want this stuff because these things won't happen without USAID and the Department of State and other aspects of the federal government that fund these sorts of things. These are artificial. They're astroturfed. It's not like the people, I mean, maybe they'll put together a trans opera or something in Western Europe, but that's not going to come out of the soil in Colombia on its own. You're not going to get these movements in Africa. They're not real. They're not of the people. The people don't want them. They think I think a lot of people probably think that they're stupid and don't recognize just how nefarious they are, that there's an actual goal here, that they're trying to hurt them. They just think, oh, well, that's stupid. I don't know why I spend my money on that. Let's get rid of that. Maybe some well-meaning, dumb college kid came up with it. And they don't realize what ties it all together. But hey, I'll be happy with them just simply not existing anymore.
You and me both, brother. It's going to be a fun one, though, tomorrow. I look forward to your interview. I can't wait to see that tomorrow.
Yeah, I would
Can't wait to see it.
I would ask if David Azerrad had anything to tell me, but probably if he did, it shouldn't be mentioned on air. That's how we communicate.
There was one point before the interview where he turned to the camera and said, frightened, "Have you been filming?"
That's perfect. All right, we'll catch you tomorrow, Bedford.
See you then.
Don't go anywhere. Is birthright citizenship actually constitutional? Former Trump lawyer John Eastman will weigh in. Coming up. Tonight in the spotlight, Trump's promise to end birthright citizenship. First, what exactly is birthright citizenship? Well, currently in America, it's a legal concept that's supposedly guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, which states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States of the state wherein they reside. Now, on Inauguration Day, President Trump issued an executive order ending birthright citizenship, arguing that babies born to illegal aliens or people on temporary visas are not under the jurisdiction of the United States and therefore not citizens. Earlier this week, a group of House Republicans asked federal courts to decide in favor of Donald Trump by denying emergency requests made by several blue states and immigration advocates to block the order. Now, in a separate case yesterday, a federal judge blocked Trump's executive order, saying it's likely unconstitutional. So, here to break all of this down for us is John Eastman. He's a former Trump lawyer and a senior fellow for the Claremont Institute. So, John, thanks so much for joining us here today. So what's your take on all of this with Trump and his argument against birthright citizenship?
Well, I think his argument in his executive order is clearly correct. What's been most discouraging to me is how ignorant the judges that are hearing these initial rounds of litigation are. I mean, the judge in Seattle, I listened to the preliminary injunction hearing this morning, and the plaintiffs, the states and some individual plaintiffs, just made blatantly false representations about what the state of the law is. This is an open question in constitutional law, whether subject to the jurisdiction covers only citizens and permanent residents domiciled here, or does it also extend to temporary visitors and those who are illegally here? And the government lawyer from the Department of Justice made a spectacular argument, hitting all the points, citing controlling Supreme Court precedent on that very question, citing the records of the debates over the Congress. And when he was done, the judge says, I find this is extraordinary. There's no basis for any of this. He didn't even look at the evidence, and he signed the preliminary injunction order right there without ever confronting or even talking about any of the clear evidence about what the original meaning of that clause was. It was preposterous. And yet I fear we're going to get that in all of these trial courts around the country, and probably in a good number of the courts of appeals, before it gets to the Supreme Court, where one hopes the judges there, the justices, will actually take more seriously the original meaning of this clause and look at the arguments instead of just discounting them with the back of your hand.
So, John, I mean, one thing that's remarkable about what's going on now is that, I remember just a few years ago, really, if you made this argument, and you've made this argument very clearly for a long time, people would sort of jump out of their seats and say, oh my gosh, that's terrible. How can you say that? Even on the right. But there's something that's changed where I think a lot of people in the audience, forget the legal audience, they listen and they go, this makes a lot of sense. And you can see since the executive order came out, you can certainly see outside of the legacy media, people really grabbing on to this argument. So I guess when it comes to the legal path forward, do you think that just by virtue of them denying or making such shoddy arguments as you saw today over and over again, there's going to be public pressure and support for this, putting aside, legally, the legal path?
Yeah, I think so. And, contrary to this judge, and I'm going to name his name, Judge Kuhnauer up in Seattle. He's a senior status judge, was appointed way back by Ronald Reagan, which, one expects the Reagan judges to actually take more seriously very credible and viable arguments instead of giving in the back of the hand. But in the popular presses, there's just this groundswell because the arguments we've been making make sense. Mm-hmm. And I listened to a podcast from Megyn Kelly yesterday, and she begins by saying, when she interviewed President Trump back in 2023 about this question, she thought it was just the silliest argument she'd ever heard. And then she read my writings on it and started looking at the underlying support and the actual record. And she's now come to the position that we're probably right. And I think the more people that look at that underlying record, and we've tried to do it in several fashions. We've tried to do it with posts on X. We've tried to do it with popular articles, like my article last week or 2 weeks ago when Trump first signed the Order on American Mind, which has now received more than 250,000 views. But we've also done it with very significant and thorough scholarship in law review articles, in briefs before the Supreme Court, on which former Attorney General Ed Meese joined me, in books that Tom West and Ed Erler and others at Claremont have done, or other scholars that don't have any connection with Claremont, like Lino Graglia, the late Lino Graglia from the University of Texas, or Roger Smith and Peter Schuck when they were at Yale, and one of them still is, the other's at the University of Pennsylvania. And probably one of the most scholarly judges in the country on the courts of appeals, Richard Posner, in a concurring opinion, said the same thing, that we're probably right about this. So I think the more people actually look at it and get beyond the knee-jerk, well, subject to jurisdiction simply means subject to the law, and if you're here and you're not a diplomat, you're subject to our laws. That is a sophomoric understanding of the debate. And it's gotten so silly. People say, well, if they're not subject to our jurisdiction, then illegal immigrants can't be detained and deported for any violation of the law because they're not subject to our jurisdiction. I mean, that's just stupid. And yet serious scholars are throwing that argument out there, refusing to accept the distinction between being subject to our territorial jurisdiction. You follow our laws while you're within our borders, and subject to the more complete jurisdiction in the sense that you owe allegiance to this country, something that people that are just temporarily visiting, and certainly people that are here illegally, don't have. And, we don't have to make this up or pretend. I mean, Senator Howard, the author of the language, was asked that very question, and he said unambiguously, it means subject to the complete jurisdiction. That you owe allegiance to this country, not just temporary sojourners was the phrase at the time, passing through and visiting. And so I think the historical record is compelling. And the first couple of Supreme Court cases to look at that issue actually agreed with us. And there's been no Supreme Court case ever saying that the children of illegal immigrants or the children of temporary visitors are citizens. And yet this judge up in Seattle, like the judge in Maryland, and I'm sure like the judges tomorrow and next week out in the Northeast, where these other cases are pending, are gonna completely ignore all that and act like this is a done deal and it's been settled for centuries. It's just nonsense.
All right, so there are so many court cases, right? You're laying them out. On one hand, right, there's the 14th Amendment, and then on the other hand, you have Trump's executive order. So take me through legally how you would go about unwinding this for the average people out there that they could understand.
So the 14th Amendment, and the one thing that the scholars on the left are right about is if the 14th Amendment actually mandates birthright citizenship, the president can't change that by an executive order. And I fully agree with that, and I think everybody does. The question is, does the 14th Amendment mandate birthright citizenship? And most people, and I'll give you one example. Senator from Hawaii, Hirono, posted on her Twitter account last week, the Constitution is clear. All persons born in the United States, ... are citizens. That's what she wrote on her Twitter account. Well, the ... elides over the critical phrase, and subject to the jurisdiction. And here's the short argument. Subject to the jurisdiction meant subject to the complete jurisdiction, not the mere partial or territorial jurisdiction. And if it's subject to the complete jurisdiction, then people who are temporarily visiting and people who are illegally don't have children that are automatic citizens, because the children through their parents don't owe allegiance to this country. They owe allegiance to a foreign power. And the 14th Amendment never was intended to provide automatic citizenship for them. And all that Trump has done is clarify what the original meaning of that phrase was in the 14th Amendment. Now, Congress is free if they want to extend citizenship to people above the Constitution's mandate. They're free to do so under the naturalization power. But riddle me this. If Congress were to have a bill that says anybody from China that lands in L.A. for a month before the baby's born and then goes back home, that baby's a citizen, do you think there's a chance in hell that bill would pass this Congress with the American people watching closely on what they're doing? It would not, just as it wouldn't have in 1868. Oh, and then if you ask the next question, how about the children of people who have come here illegally? You're going to give them citizenship as a reward for that illegal conduct, that breach of our sovereignty, that illegal crossing of our border? Overwhelmingly, the American people would say no. So if this question is ever presented to give additional citizenship beyond what the 14th Amendment requires, it's a resounding no. And the notion that we can somehow interpret that constitutional amendment as doing what the American people never voted for, never would have voted for, is just utter nonsense.
I really appreciate the way in which President Trump has been articulating this lately. He's been making the case publicly, and I of course grew up hearing it from people like you, learning from you. When you look at this now, one of the things that he says, of course, which is also great, which we should note here, is that there's a reason most countries don't do this because it doesn't make any sense throughout the rest of the world. But let's see. It sounds like you think this is going to go to the Supreme Court. And if it does, I mean, you respond to that, but if it does, how do you break this down when it comes to the judges who are historically right-leaning?
Yeah, so let's talk about the process of getting to the Supreme Court first. The granting of a preliminary injunction blocking an executive order of the president is immediately appealable. And so the Department of Justice can bring immediate appeals from these several cases. Once it's at the Court of Appeals, they could even file a petition for writ of certiorari, asking the Supreme Court to take the case up even before the courts of appeals have ruled. Now, I don't know if they're going to do that, but that would be the quickest time frame to get there. Once it gets there, I think it's a crapshoot. I'll guarantee you there are three justices who would never, because they don't think they're bound by the original meaning of the Constitution. They just think that this is a political move, and the three justices on the left would never vote to uphold Trump's executive order. I think the most serious originalists, Thomas and Alito, and arguably Gorsuch are going to at least take very seriously the arguments that are being made. And I've been reading the Department of Justice briefs. We were prepared to weigh in with an amicus brief on behalf of the Claremont Institute if need be, but they hit every single argument that I would have hit. They cited the sources that I would have cited. I think they were probably had our law review articles in front of them, because a lot of this stuff is archaic, and they had it all in their briefs. So it was very good, very well done. And I think those three staunch originalists are at least likely to take very seriously the argument instead of giving it the back of the hand like this judge up in Seattle did. The question is, what about the justices in the middle, Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett? Certainly Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett purport to be originalists, and one would hope that they would take seriously these arguments. Roberts mouths that he's an originalist, but he's had some doozies of opinions that haven't followed that line. And there's a lot of politics swirling around this case. So it's hard to say particularly how Justice Roberts would come down. But I think there's a fair chance of getting at least 5 votes here. And if they take this seriously, if they actually do the work, roll up their sleeves, look at the original arguments, and they don't have to read all thousands of pages of the debates. I mean, we've pulled it out for them in our own scholarship, and that'll be part of our amicus brief there. And the Department of Justice is tapping those resources as well and identifying what the exact language is, what it was meant by the people that drafted it, by the people that authored the 14th Amendment and that particular language, by the people that ratified it, by the leading constitutional treatise writer of the day, Thomas Cooley, by the first couple of Supreme Court cases that even looked at this question. All of it is in sync with our view on this, by Secretary of State opinions in the 1880s, where a Scottish guy was born here while his dad was visiting, and the Secretary of State said, you're not a citizen. You don't owe allegiance to the United States. So executive, legislative, and judicial branches and the scholarly treatises, the legislative history, the fundamental principle of consent of the governed, rather than this old feudal notion of if you're born on the king's soil, you owe the king perpetual allegiance. All of those line up to support the president's executive order. And if any justice is willing to look at that and to take seriously those originalist views, I think we win.
Well, I'm glad it's finally getting its time in the sun. It is long overdue. John Eastman, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much. And, let's keep shining a light on this and calling out these judges. They're not doing their job. This judge up in Seattle, quite simply, didn't even bother to look at the arguments. When he signed the temporary restraining order last week, he admitted he'd already signed it before they even had the oral argument. This is an outrage on something as significant as this, as carefully thought out by the President of the United States as this, that the judges wouldn't even bother to give it the time of day.
Absolutely. Keep us posted, John.
All right. Thank you.
And Matthew, you can tell John is going to forget more about this than we will ever learn in the rest of our lives about this topic.
Well, I mean, the thing that's maddening is that this argument is out there. He's made this argument. Many others have come together and made this argument from Claremont and other places for a long time. And it's forceful because it's true, because it has the burden of evidence on its side, and it comports with the principles of the American constitutional republic, as he said. And so I think what's going to happen is people like us are going to hold these judges to account every step of the way, because right now the audience knows, the base knows, that President Trump is absolutely correct, and they don't like this asinine idea that you just come here and you're magically an American. That's crazy.
And we see waste, fraud, and abuse everywhere. When we come back, can the American people get a USAID refund? We'll have some taxpayer input after this. As Chris Bedford said earlier on the show, it's the entire system getting exposed right now. We need to turn the dial off for the funds, not only for USAID, but for a lot of what I still call waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. So I went to X this morning and I just said, I know it's not going to happen, you guys, but when do we get our money back from USAID? I know I'm not the only one who is thinking this at this point in time, because we saw Eric Schmidt earlier on the show just go through and list all of the millions of dollars that are going to other countries for their DEI program. So, maybe some of them can just give us some money back. Rob Eno replied, our coworker, Rob Eno, said, unfortunately, Never. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for that.
Hard truth.
It is.
Hard truth.
It's a hard way to start out. Uncommon Joyce replied, I think we need a tax amnesty year where taxes aren't taken out of any private citizen's paycheck to make up for at least a portion of our money that they've wasted. I am all for that.
Sounds great. Little year jubilee.
Yeah, it is the Jubilee year. Let's go ahead and have it on the entire level for the federal government as well. Ryan Tyre said that the USAID was just the small stuff. Not only do we want our money back, but we don't want to pay income tax anymore. Signed, we the people. All right, Ryan, I'm with you. I just don't think that one is actually going to happen yet. We can go through, we can audit the IRS, we can audit the Fed, the Pentagon, throw them in there. They've missed 7 different budget deadlines. I'm with you, but I think at some point we still have to pay taxes.
Yeah, well, look, I think that the important thing here is people are really thinking hard, and it's because it's being smashed into their face, just how they're being hijacked. I mean, the government is hijacking your resources to support things to increase leftist power, and that's not okay. I mean, the American Revolution was fought for less, and it's not okay at all. So the more that people think and talk that way, I think that's the right attitude. The right attitude is, it is your money, this is your country, and we are citizens in a republic, and if we are, then we're not serfs in some kind of, lefty empire, and that has to be done and over with. So I do think there'll be changes to the tax code even beyond what Trump has proposed today that will be far-reaching, but they're tied in with a lot of economic, broad-scale changes going on. If we keep pushing in the right direction, I think we'll get to a better place.
You say hijacking resources, and that just makes me think of our conversation with John Eastman, because it feels like with the birthright citizen issue, it feels like they're just hijacking our laws and saying, no, they're ours. We're going to take them. And everybody for decades now has just been like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, look, and I was like this too. I mean, before I went to Claremont, I had John as a professor, and then he became a colleague when I was working at the Claremont Institute. He's been at this a long time. When you first hear it, even good conservatives will say, well, wait a minute, I thought if you're born here, you become a citizen. That's just the way it works. But when you start thinking about it and unpacking it, you realize there is no real law laying this out. It's not clearly constitutional at all. And of course, why would you let that happen? And if you do let it happen, guess what happens? People fly here to have a baby. And that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make you an American just because of where you're born, right? So this is a real live issue, and it's one that is very important. And the Eastman, who's been through hell as Trump's lawyer, with everything that happened on January 6th, he's got a give, send, go. You can go support him. He still needs financial support. He's got legal fees coming out the ears because they tried to ruin his entire career and his livelihood because he gave the president legal advice. And now, what he's argued for his whole life is in an executive order, and it's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, he took a stand, and people are coming after him because that's what they do. When you take that stand, they are going to just go through and attack you and try and make an example of you so other people don't go out and follow suit. But now, at least, he is getting a little bit of his revenge with this going through. It's his whole life work that is coming through to an end. But I want to go back to government funding with you, because there is some way that we do need to have some government funding. So how do we use that the best way possible and maybe even just get some of our wins on the right?
Yeah, so I want people to think about this, because in general, I'm with we have to slash and burn a lot, and if we take our eyes off that prize, we won't get rid of the Department of Education. We won't get rid of things that shouldn't exist. But in the midst of all this, we need to remember there's a reason the left did what they did, and their argument in the beginning was that these were things that were actually good for America, right? And when you think about things, especially locally and at the state level, like civic education, like civic monuments, right? Like funding good art in communities, there's no reason why local communities can't do that. Local governments can't do that. State governments can't do that. And in fact, at the national level, you'd want to give out awards at least and recognize people who are actually talented. So in other words, don't let the fact that the left has used this money to, they wasted a ton of money, first off, but don't let the fact that they used it for ridiculous trans operas in Colombia take your eyes off the fact that we need to award artists here who are actually making beautiful things, and they exist. We need a cultural renaissance in this country where we actually are focused on the true, good, and beautiful. And there is a role much, much smaller than the role that the left has hijacked the government for. But there is a role for civic institutions to play in supporting things that are actually true, good, and beautiful, especially at the state and local level. And especially at the federal level in awarding and giving honors. One of the jobs of government, the true jobs of government, is to give awards and honors. And this is more important than you realize because it sets status and prestige and what people who are talented want to strive for. And what they have done is they've ruined that status. They've given the awards to ridiculous, silly people, to people who aren't talented, to people who create ugly stuff. And we need to wrest that power back, the power to set the agenda and to set the framework of the kind of culture we want and the kind of way of life we want in America in the 21st century.
Step one, stopping giving money to people that hate you.
Yes.
Stop giving money to government programs
absolutely,
that people that
absolutely
they hate you.
Step one, turn off the spigot, right?
Step two,
yeah.
then you can
Step
go
two is to
through.
rethink what the structure of these programs should look like, if they should exist at all, and if they should exist, what should they be doing? The reason the left did what they did is because it works, right? I mean, it worked. They took over everything. And so we don't want to do it quite in the same way, but we need to rethink what all these agencies and departments should be doing. And when we find a good use for them, we need to use those departments and agencies and their powers for unabashedly for good.
Well, I want to go back in the few minutes that we have left here in the show, just to Kash Patel and the fact that the Democrats are trying to go through, and they've successfully put it back by a week, right? Okay, now they're buying time because they know Kash is going to be so effective at this. And can you imagine with what's happening right now, this week at the federal level in government, and you put Kash Patel at the FBI director, and you bring all of these forces together, can you imagine what that first, second, third week will look like?
No, look, this is reprehensible what they're doing, because what they're doing is just shamelessly in public buying time to hope for a Hail Mary pass, to find something that sticks, to find something. And like I said, they're going to, at the beginning, they're going to just throw stuff at them. And so this is what you do when you know you're losing, right? And you don't think you can win in the situation. You just try to buy time. You try to push off, and maybe there's a chance, maybe there's a chance. Now, I don't think there is a chance. I think that there's a lot of momentum, but it shows how afraid they are. And exactly what you said, imagine just in the few weeks, right? You're right. If he'd been in charge, they're already moving, right? They're ready to go. And I really think it's a dying gasp, but you never know. It's dangerous. And it's pathetic because it's so shamelessly political.
And if we can spend $45 million on a DEI program for Burma, Kash Patel is an Indian man who is now here in the United States. You would think this is exactly what they want. They don't even have to spend any money to do this.
No, diversity.
Right there.
Diversity only matters if you agree with the Borg. That's how it works. They don't give a damn at all about his diversity, and they fear him, and they're fearful now. They're in disarray, and this is like kind of a rear guard as they're running backwards. This is a rear guard motion to try to slow things up, but hopefully it won't work.
No diversity of thought, not on the leftists, but you know what? It's okay. We'll get through it somehow, some way. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow night to break it all down.
It's going to be good.